Na, dabar išgirsime World Bank vyriausiojo transporto specialisto Rytų Europos ir Centrinės
And now,
Azijos regiono.
we will hear lead transport specialist at World Bank, Eastern Europe and Central Asia region, about transport decarbonization, the World Bank perspective, and this presentation is going to be given by Daniel Pulido. Daniel also has published many research articles in transport decarbonization, transport innovations. So Daniel is going to speak about transport decarbonization, the World Bank perspective.
Many thanks for the kind introduction, and thanks to the organizing committee for inviting me to participate in this forum and make this presentation. Good morning, everyone. I'm here representing the World Bank. As you may know, the World Bank is one of the largest sources of funding and knowledge for developing countries. We provide loans to public and private transportation projects in over 180 countries, and we're physically present in 170 of these countries. Of course, there are many development challenges that affect development and that are required or that we need to tackle to enable development. Some of these have to do with connectivity within countries. Others have to do with connecting countries that may be landlocked or lack the basic infrastructure to access markets. Today, I'm just going to talk about one of these challenges, which is the challenge of transport decarbonization. And I'm going to do it from the perspective of developing countries. The first thing to point out is that the World Bank's mission just got expanded now to explicitly include climate change. I don't know if you followed our recent annual meetings and the announcement by our president, but he basically announced to the world that our mission is now to end extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity on a livable planet. This means that we have finally come to recognize that climate change can really affect the achievement of the development goals that we have long pursued. It doesn't really pay off to invest in health when you have rising climate, and this rising climate leads to changing in the patterns of infectious diseases, and these diseases turn into pandemics. It doesn't pay off to finance transportation projects when some of these transport links that we finance are destroyed by climate-related disasters. So really, this change in our mission is really allowing us to put climate at the forefront and really double our efforts to further support climate change mitigation and adaptation, provide them much greater funding and cheap loans to finance the transition. As of last year, our total climate finance portfolio stood at $29 billion. That's over 40% of our total lending to both the public and private sectors. And we, of course, now want to increase that share, that amount of financing going to climate finance through this new mission and through the new mandate that we got from our shareholders. So why is it important to talk about developing countries when we talk about transport decarbonization? The answer is very simple. It is important because almost all the growth in transport emissions since 2000 has happened in developing countries. As you can see in the chart at the bottom right, there is a big difference between the rate of growth in transport emissions between developing countries or non-OECD countries, that's the red line, and the rate of growth in transport emissions in OECD countries. Transport is also the fastest growing source of GHG emissions globally. These emissions are poised to increase from 8 to 18 gigatons of emissions a year by 2050 under a business-as-usual scenario, under a do-nothing scenario, when in reality they should be converging towards 2 gigatons per year in order for us to be able to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement of having temperature below, or having temperature increase be below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Because transport emissions are the fastest growing, it means that they will become the largest source of emissions in the near future or in the future. We saw earlier in the presentation by the International Energy Agency that energy is doing a good job in decarbonizing. The share of renewables is going up. We're reaching a point where like fossil fuels are peaking. Well, transport, we're facing a different reality. It's one that we can still address, but it means that if we do nothing, the transport emissions will grow from the 20% where they currently stand, 20% of all emissions, to become 60% of all emissions by 2050. And doing something about it is very hard because, I mean, the large majority of the emissions associated with transport come from the road transport subsector, and this is a very hard to abate transport subsector, particularly if you consider the reality of the countries where the World Bank works, where there may not be a lot of alternatives to road transport. They don't have extensive rail networks, and also where buying an electric truck is difficult due to affordability and due to the nature of the transport operators that are not as sophisticated and don't have as much access to finance. It's even hard in Europe, where you have a rail network that is extensive, but even here you have seen how there has been more money going to roads and the share of rail has been going down. So really, it's a very important challenge, and the challenge is mainly centered in the developing world. How are we approaching this challenge at the World Bank? I think it's very important to say that we're not doing it only in one way, right? We have a multifaceted approach to it. We're not only focusing on improving, that's, you know, the factor or the aspect that you see there in the middle, meaning basically improving the efficiency of transportation by, you know, introducing electrification or by supporting e-logistics platforms. We are also doing other things that are not like as exciting as new technologies or new fuels, but that are also key to decarbonize transport. And by that I mean these other two factors. The first one being avoid, and that has to do with, you know, eliminating the need for transportation altogether with better urban planning policies that create, you know, more dense and compact cities where most of activities can be carried out within a small radius. Of course, we also want to do a little bit of shifting. That's the second factor there, which means shifting transportation from high fuel intensity modes to greener modes. And these are not like greener modes. We're not talking about new technologies or new fuels that are just becoming, you know, viable. We're talking about what we have known for ages, basically walking, cycling, and using transit. So it's a shift that is not only a shift in the actual transport mode, but it's also a shift in mentality, because in many of the countries where we work in, you know, owning a car is seen as a sign of personal achievement, is seen as a sign of development. And what we say at the World Bank is that a developed country is not one where everyone has a car, but one where everyone wants to take transit. So some of these shifts that we're trying to make happen also involve changing that mentality. And finally, we have another dimension of decarbonizing transport, which is resilience, which means making, you know, our transport networks, road, rail, more resilient to these climate-related disasters. So when you put all of this together, you end up with the Avoid, Shift, Improve, and Resilience framework, or the ASIR framework that we call. And this is the framework that basically guides all of our development thinking around transport and transport decarbonization. It is also important to mention that we also see greening transport as a way to reinforce other development objectives, right? By investing in greener transportation, we can also improve health, because, you know, pollutions are very high in the countries where we work in. And we can also achieve other objectives, such as, for instance, improving road safety, because by shifting more people to public transit, we're also making transportation safer and reducing the high incidence of accidents and fatalities that are a big burden in developing countries. And I think our entire framework, these two elements that I just presented, also are not enough in the sense that we don't want to not do transport. We don't want to close the door to transport investment. What we want to do is to do them right. And this is really at the core of the Paris alignment commitments that we have taken as well. So altogether, these elements is what guide the way we work with the countries, both in lending and knowledge. Starting with lending, I just wanted to say that we have a large portfolio of transport projects, over 34 billion, so that makes us the largest development financier in this sector. The share of climate finance within our project has increased in an important manner. We has gone from 37% in 2017 to 56% at the end of June this year. All our financing, starting from July 1st, 2023, has to be compliant with the Paris Agreement principles. That means that in any project that we consider, we have to first look at ways of supporting the low-carbon options when they're technically and economically feasible. And if they're not, we have to find ways to mitigate the impact. And the same with the resilience side. We always have to look at the material impacts of climate adverse events and ensure that project design considers that. There's a list here of some of the projects we've done. I'm going to focus on two that I think are important because they show how certain investment can have a large impact in the countries, in developing countries. The first one is the Dakar Bus Rapid Transit, which is a $300 million financing by the bank, and that also involves private investment that is coming in through the operator of the bus system. As you may know, a bus rapid transit system is a single lane, exclusive lane for buses that is served by high quality and modern vehicles. And it's a system that provides a good quality of service, almost approaching that of a metro at a fraction of the cost. So this means that these systems can be more easily deployed by developing countries, and these systems are also, they can be replicated across countries. In the specific case of Dakar, we're financing the first of these BRT systems that uses electric buses, which is a huge advantage. I mean, the project is expected to cut emissions by 2 million tons over the life of the project, and also reduce commute times by about 50 minutes. So it's making a big difference to the people there. And it's also one where we'll see how this technology adapts, or how this technology can be suitable for these rapid transit solutions. We have funded about 20 of these projects worldwide, in Latin America, in East Asia, South Asia, now in Africa, where we have active portfolio, or an active portfolio of projects under preparation. The second project I wanted to focus on is e-buses, right? We've talked a lot about the electrification of four-wheelers and private vehicles, but we think there's a lot of potential in buses. And in the case of Cairo, what we have done is finance 100 of these electric buses to serve as a pilot that will allow us to see how well can these buses run in a crowded city environment as the one in Cairo. It will allow us to show people that they can have quality transportation services. It will allow us to see how charging and maintenance can be done in this city context. And it will basically set the stage for then a larger investment to come in, also involving private investment later on. We have also recently closed, I think it was announced this week, a financing by our private sector arm, the International Finance Corporation, to a fleet provider in the city of Santiago in Chile, in Latin America. This financing will be used by this company to in turn provide buses for the operators of the Santiago transit system, which will now become the second city, or the second country, let's say Chile, outside of China, to have the greatest number of e-buses. So it's a very interesting development, and they're also expanding to use the same scheme to other cities in the country. Besides lending, we also have knowledge products, and we support our clients in helping them adapt all of these solutions that we're talking about here in this forum to their specific conditions, to the specific conditions of developing economies. You can find many of these publications in our website, of course, and also you can access them through these QR codes that you will see as I go through the slides. I'm going to go briefly through some of these, through their main conclusions, as they relate to transport decarbonization. But you can see there that we touch on every topic that has been discussed so far, from sustainable aviation fuels and the implications for developing countries, how can they get inserted in the supply chains for SAF, also decarbonization of maritime industry, and an important portion of this has to do to where is this alternative fuels, where are these alternative fuels going to come from? And I think that is a role that developing countries can play, having extensive solar resource for green methanol, or having a lot of biomass that can be used for this purpose. And of course, we also focus on our publications on how we decarbonize the different activities of transport. So let me start with one of the biggest challenges that we have collectively in the world, which is how we address the challenge of decarbonizing urban transport. This is key because, as you know, world's population and economic activity is concentrated increasingly in cities. And this exploding urbanization is putting a lot of strain on urban transport systems that are already not that great to begin with, in some cases even non-existent. So this is a very important area for tackling decarbonization. Not only, of course, we have focused a lot on logistics so far, but this urban part of it is also very important. What this report found is that, as I said before, many of the solutions do not involve fancy technologies or new fuels, automation, data. It's more of a back-to-basics approach, right? Starting with the most important one, public policies to create more compact and dense cities, that basically eliminate the need to move, where you can do more locally and have less of a need to transport. Of course, investments to shift people to greener transport. This requires, basically increasing the quality of public transportation so that middle class in developing countries is enticed, to use a bus or to take the metro. And of course, investing in more energy-efficient vehicles. And this is very much the place where electric buses and electric public transport comes in. And I'll tell you more about that in the next slide. All of this sounds very simple and very obvious, but how do we get there? And I think one of the key recognitions of the report is that we need money to do this, right? We need to increase the sources of funding for the sector. And this really means a few things. It means eliminating fossil fuel subsidies to begin with and using some of that money to invest in public transport, but also charging the people who create these negative externalities by using private vehicles, for instance, parking and congestion charging. Also, engaging the private sector will be very important, and we're working a lot with our countries to see how they can, bring in private sector expertise and finance to operate transport systems. A second report that I want to call your attention to, and it's one that has been very well received and has created a lot of interest in the development communities, this report that we recently published on the economics of e-mobility. This report shows that e-mobility is not only a solution for the richer or more advanced nations, it's also a solution for developing countries. So it basically shows that for certain type of vehicles, in particular those vehicles with low cost, such as two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and also those vehicles that have a high level of usage, mainly buses that run that have a high number of kilometers every day in terms of operation. Both those type of vehicles are the ones where you are already seeing that the total cost of ownership is achieving parity with internal combustion engines. And this is a very important finding because, sometimes people question, why electric vehicles for these countries? If they are so much more expensive, are they going to have an affordability issue? No, and the reality is that they're becoming already cost competitive. The second finding is that e-mobility can help decarbonize countries even when the energy matrix of these countries is not fully clean or when there is still a heavy reliance on fossil fuels. And this is basically because, e-vehicles are more energy efficient. You need less fossil fuel, or you have energy that is being produced by fossil fuels, but the vehicles themselves are using less energy to run the same number of kilometers because they have less waste in terms of, heat and noise, and these engines are more, or the motors are more efficient. And lastly, the third finding is that e-mobility can be, a good thing in itself, or a good thing only because of the local pollution benefits that it brings, right? Basically, we're talking about cities that are highly polluted, such as Delhi or Cairo, where it's really affecting the quality of life and the health of people. And introducing e-buses, although the matrix may not be completely clean, it may allow to, improve the health of people, no? This is, the three main, findings. And of course, there are other ramifications of this, E-mobility can be a way for countries to reduce their dependency on oil. Some of these are very dependent on imports. It can also promote inclusive mobility. If you think of these two-wheeler and three-wheelers, electric ones, as a way to connect, transit with the places where people live and serve as this last-mile connectivity purpose. And it can also help these countries get into the supply chains of electric vehicles. So it should be seen as a comprehensive policy that encompasses industrial objectives, energy objectives, and transportation. What we're really missing here is the financing, right? How we can finance these vehicles that have a higher upfront cost. And here we're working on new solutions like e-bus as a service solutions, which are kind of like leasing solutions that allow to bring down that upfront cost and also allow for another party to take on some of the technology risks and some of the battery risks that maybe a public sector operator doesn't know yet how to take. So this is really what we're doing here, focusing on innovation in delivery, in business models. Just as with urban transport, we also prepare a report that is focused on the challenge of decarbonizing logistics. This is key because, as we have seen, global freight volumes are expected to triple by 2050. And this is great because expansion of logistics is good news for the economy, but it also poses a serious threat, in terms of climate change. Basically, what we propose here is that every country should come up with a green logistics plan. And this plan should incorporate solutions that can be implemented right away. We should not wait for the long-haul truck to be ready or to be feasible, but rather move to do some of these avoid, shift, and improve actions that I mentioned before. In terms of shift, we see rail and inland waterway transport as alternatives that are there. It's just that in many places, these are not commercial, or we've had the case in Europe where all of the EU promoted reforms have been great in terms of organizing the sector and promoting the separation of cargo, passengers, and infrastructure, but still, you need to go a step further to make sure that these operations are commercial, that these operations can attract cargo away from other modes, and that they become competitive. In terms of improving, we've talked about how to renew fleets by new, more fuel-efficient vehicles. Easier said than done, particularly in countries that do not enforce fuel efficiency or that import a high number of second-hand vehicles. We're talking about, Africa, for instance, where many of the vehicles that operate there are second-hand vehicles coming from developed countries when they reach the end of their useful life, or the Balkans. And here is very important to basically help governments come up with the regulations and also to enforce them so that you can achieve decarbonization. And lastly, also it's important to avoid the need for logistics in the first place. And this is something that is not mentioned in the slide, but that I would like to add, and it has to do with better spatial planning so that you bring economic activity and logistics closer together, right? And reduce the distance that goods have to travel. So again, it's innovative in the sense that it has to be done to be a reality. It's not like just mention it in some of the developed world. These policies may seem as very, very simple to implement, but not so much where we're working. Finally, I just wanted to talk about an instrument that we have developed as a way to pull in resources from donors and partners to implement our decarbonization vision that I just presented. This is what we call the Global Facility to Decarbonize Transport, or GFDT. This is a multi-donor trust fund that provides financial and technical assistance to World Bank teams excuse me, for project design and implementation, for research and data, and for capacity building. We're seeking to raise $100 million for this purpose, and we already have support from a few European partners, specifically Germany, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. We're looking to channel all of our activities, or support to these activities, to this trust fund that has supported very innovative stuff, such as electric mobility in India, BRTs in Africa, and we're looking to expand this fund. So look out for more activities being promoted out of this instrument. With this, and just in time, because I guess I need a glass of water to continue, I will finish my presentation. Thanks again for your attention, and hopefully this has given you a vision of what transport decarbonization looks like for developing countries and the role that the World Bank is playing together with partners and donors. Thank you.